Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Chong. Today I'm going to share with you how to make this topographic landscape in Blender3D 3.3 using geometry nodes. Okay, so before I jump into Blender, let me go through what we are going to do in this video. First, we are going to start by creating the base geometry. Then after that, based on the base geometry, we can start to create the lines that go around the base geometry. So to create the line, we are going to delete all the edges in the base geometry and left only the outline. After we finish the line, we are going to add some point and let it move along the line. Then after that, we are going to add some location pin icon on the landscape. And finally, after we finish everything, we can start to add the camera, lighting and material to finish the scene. Okay, so now without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so first, I want to start from the base geometry. So press A to select everything and delete them. Then add a plane. Name it base geometry. Go to geometry node and add a new geometry node. And now I want to clone the plane on a mesh line. We need all of them to stack together. So let's add a mesh line. Connect it to group output. Add instance on point node after the mesh line. Connect our plane to the instance. We can bring all the plane closer. Then we need to subdivide them. Let's turn on the wireframe so that we can see the line. Increase the subdivide to 6 maybe. We can come back to this later. Then next, we need to delete some faces to get the topography shape. So let's add a delete geometry after the subdivide mesh. And now you can see the node have deleted the entire object. The reason is simply because we haven't selected which face we want to delete. So Blender will thought we want to delete everything. So now to select which part we want to delete and which part we want to keep, we need a position node to get the position of all the faces on the plane. Then we need a noise texture to randomly delete some faces. Then let's add a math node and set it to less than. So now we can see it start to delete something. The reason is because by adding the less than, it will actually give us a clip value. The highest value will be 1, which is the part that are not deleted, and the lowest value is 0, which is the part that are deleted. But now you can see the pattern is too uniform, and this is not what we want. The reason why it's so uniform is that all our planes are now instant object. So the delete geometry actually delete the mesh on our original plane, and the other plane are all the clone. So to fix this issue, we need a realized instance before we delete the geometry. Now this is a bit hard to see. Let's turn on the material preview. Activate the ambient occlusion. Let's increase the factor to 2 maybe. Okay, now we need a separate XYZ. Then we need to get this Z position, and this will give us the height of each layer. Let's connect the Z axis to less than. And now we can add a color ramp after the noise texture to further adjust it. Let's play with this value until we get the pattern we want. Let's change this to 4D so that we can play with this additional value. Okay, other than tweaking this value to get the shape we want, we can also add an empty plane axis as a controller to move the texture around. So in the 3D viewport, add empty plane axis. Name it texture controller. Drag it into geometry node editor. Add a vector math node. Before the noise texture, we need to add the location of the controller and the position of all the faces together. Set this to subtract. Then let's try to move the controller to see if everything works. Okay, now I want the scale of the controller to affect the texture as well. So let's duplicate this vector math node and set it to divide. Connect the scale of the controller to divide. Then let's try to move this controller around until we get the result we want. But let's say if you want to follow my visual, you can follow this value in the transform panel. Let's try to scale the controller slightly smaller. I think we can slightly increase the size of the plane as well. Okay, I think this is good for me. Next, we need to extrude the mesh and make the edge rounded. So let's add an extrude node before the group output. Untick individual, scale it smaller. Then to make the edge rounded, let's go to the modifier tab, add a smooth modifier, adjust the factor until we get the shape we want. Untick Z-axis, we don't want the modifier to affect Z-axis. Okay, now we done the base geometry. Let's tidy up all these nodes before we go further. Select all these nodes, frame them, press F2 and name it plane cloning. Select all these nodes, frame it, press F2, name it delete geometry. For this one, simply name it extrude mesh. Okay, next, we can start to create the lines. So to create the lines, let's duplicate the base geometry, rename it lines, hide the base geometry for now. Before we do anything, remember to make a single user copy for this geometry node. Then for the lines, we don't need to extrude mesh, so let's select it and press Ctrl X to delete. And now we need to delete all the edges here and leave only the outlines. So to do that, let's add another geometry nodes after the smooth modifier. Press home button to see the nodes. Then we are going to use a couple of new nodes to select the edge we want to delete. The first one we are going to use is called vertex neighbor. This node gives us the vertex count and the face count. So we are going to use the vertex count. The vertex count is basically how many edges are connected to any given vertex. So for example, if we look at this mesh, we'll see that the endpoint here should have a value of 1. This point will have the value of 2. And this point will have the value of 3. So now, if we deactivate the smooth modifier, you can see most of the points at the edge here got 2 or 3 edges connect to it. That means most of them have 2 or 3 vertex count. So now we want to select all these edges that have 2 or 3 vertex count and keep them and delete the other edges. So to find out and select all the edges that have 2 or 3 vertex count, we need another node called edge vertices. This node can tell us what is the index of the first and second vertex for that edge. Then we also need a node called fill at index. Fill at index let us extract certain value out of a given field. Let's change this to integer. So when we are looking for an edge, we need to first look at the vertex 1. Then the vertex we are looking for is a point because the point domain is where we can get the vertex count. So when we connect the vertex count to the value at fill at index, this value will output the vertex count of the first vertex in that edge. Then we need to duplicate this and do the same thing for vertex 2. So this value gives us the vertex count of the second vertex in that edge. So now we have already found out the vertex count for each of these vertices. Then what we want to do is we want to select all these edges that have 2 or 3 vertex count and keep them and delete the other edges. So 2 or 3 vertex count means it's less than 4 vertex count. So let's add a less than compare node. Less than 4. Duplicate this for vertex 2. Now we want the case where either one of these is less than 4. So let's add a boolean math node and set it to all. Then we want to delete the edge. So let's add a delete geometry. set it to edge, connect this to the selection. Okay, now we can see almost all the first row of the edges has been deleted, but this is actually the edges we want to keep and we want to delete the rest. So to invert the selection, let's duplicate this boolean math node and set it to not. Okay, now there are still a lot of edges need to be deleted, but before we go further to delete them, let's select all these nodes and press Ctrl J to frame them. Name it delete edges A maybe. Then we can continue to delete all these leftover edges. So for this one, all these edges have vertex count of 1. So let's duplicate the delete edges A and put it before the group output. Rename it delete edges B. Hold alternate, drag the delete geometry and put it here. Connect the boolean math to the selection again. Then we can delete the not, we don't need it anymore. And we want to select the vertex count that equal to 1. Okay, now we left the edges that have 3 or more vertex count. So again, let's duplicate the delete edges B and put it before the group output. Rename it delete edges C. Hold alternate and drag the delete geometry, put on this line. Connect it again. Then for this one, we want it to be greater than or equal to 3. Okay, now we can turn on the smooth modifier again. Next, we can start to animate the line. So to animate the line, first we need to turn this mesh line into curve. Then we need a trim curve node. Now let's add some keyframe for this. I want the animation to end at 350 frame. Then go to around frame 20. Add the trim curve node, slide the end value to 0, hover it and press I to add a keyframe. Go to around frame 110, slide the end value to 1, hover and press I again to add another keyframe. Okay, so now you can see there are some of the lines that haven't trimmed by the trim curve node. So to fix this, we can simply add a set spline cyclic node before the trim curve node. Okay, now everything looks fine. So let's frame all these nodes and name it trim curve. Next, we can start to add some points and make it moving along the line. So to add the points on the lines, first we need a join geometry. Then we need instant on point node. So for the points, I'm going to use point cloud. So let's add the instant to point node. By the way, the point cloud is only supported in cycles. So if you plan to use Eevee as your render engine, you might need to add something to the instant input here. And if you are adding something to the instant, you don't have to add this instant to point node as well. Okay, now there are too many points on the line. Let's add a random value to reduce it. Set this to boolean. Play with this value until we get the result we want. Okay, next we can start to animate the points. So to animate the points, we need a set position. Then to move it along the line, we need a sample curve node. Then I want to take the curve from the trim curve node. Then we can output the position to the set position. Change this to factor. And we can slide through the factor to animate the point. But now we can't really keyframe this factor to animate the points, because we can see we left only one point on the lines, and that's because all the points are now overlapped together in the same position. So to fix this issue, first we need to get the spline parameter of this curve before the instant on point node. So let's add a capture attribute before the instant on point node. Add a spline parameter and connect it to capture attribute. Connect the attribute to factor, and now they are not overlapped anymore. Then we can add a math node before the factor. If we slide through the value, we can see the point will disappear at the end of the line. But this is not what we want. We want it to keep moving on the lines. So to fix this, we can duplicate this math node and set it to fraction. And now, if we slide through this again, the point now is keep moving on line. But instead of add keyframe for this value, I'm going to use a scene time node to animate them. Let's play the animation to check the result. I think this is too fast. Let's add a divide to slow it down. Divide 8000 maybe. By the way, now the viewport animation is not accurate. As you can see, it is play the animation at around 10 frames per second. So it is a lot slower than the actual animation. So to preview the actual animation, we can either output the viewport animation to our PC, or in our case, we can also convert this geometry node for temporarily for us to check the animation result, because this is the geometry node that causing our viewport slower. So apply it. We are going to undo it back later, play the animation again. Okay, this is good for me. And I think we can scale up the point after the trim curve complete. So let's undo to get back our geometry node. Then we need to add some keyframe for this. So let's go to frame 100 maybe. Slide the radius to 0 and press I to add a keyframe. Then go to frame 130. Slide the radius to maybe 0.005 and press I to add another keyframe. Okay, next we can start to turn the curve into mesh. So let's add a curve to mesh node on this line. Add a curve line for the profile curve. We want the line to go towards x-axis. Put 0 for other column. Make the line thinner. Then I want the line to go from thinner to thicker. So let's add a set curve radius. Add a spline parameter and connect to the set curve radius. Then we can add a map range to adjust the thickness. I think 1.5 is enough. Then frame all this node and name it curve to mesh. Frame all this node, name it point animation. Okay, now let's try to add material to see if the final result is good. Add a set material and select line. I want to use cycle with GPU. Turn on render preview and turn off the wireframe for now. Everything good for me, but I think the line is a bit too low poly. So maybe we can increase the subdivision. And I think we can also add more lines as well. Go to the plane cloning section. Let's increase the count of the plane to 35 maybe. Make them closer. For the subdivision, let's increase to 8 maybe. Okay, it's look a lot nicer now. Next, I want to add the grid on the floor. This is actually quite simple. Let's add another plane and name it grid. Add a new geometry node. Scale the plane bigger, make it same size with the base geometry just now. Then I want to subdivide the grid. Let's subdivide 5 maybe. Then I want to turn the plane into lines. Let's add a curve line for the profile curve. Make the line thinner. Then I also want to add point on the grid. Add instant on point, instant to point. Let's scale the point smaller. Frame 3 of this node, name it grid. Frame 2 of this node, name it points. Then I want to add this little location pin to the grid as well. So let's create the pin using geometry nodes. This is also quite simple. Let's add a curve line and connect it to group output. Make it shorter. Then I want to add a circle on top of this line. Let's make it smaller. Then I only want the circle on top. I want to remove the bottom one. Then I also want a triangle on top of it. So select 3 of this node and press Shift Ctrl D to duplicate them. Connect it to join geometry. Then reduce the resolution to 3. Rotate it 90 degrees. Then let's add a translate instance. And we can move it higher. Then I want to add another circle. So duplicate this again. Then now we can start to turn this into mesh. So let's add a few curve nodes. Add it here and add it to the triangle as well. Add a curve to mesh node. Add a rectangle. Scale it smaller. Duplicate 2 of this. Put it onto this line. Then I want to animate it to scale up from nothing into this. So to do this, I'm going to use the scene time node again. Add a combine XYZ, Z-axis. Connect it to curve line. Then we need a clamp node to limit the maximum size. Let's limit the maximum size to 0.5 maybe. Add a scale element after the join geometry. Duplicate the scene time and clamp. Connect it to scale element. And let's set the maximum size to 1. I also want it to keep rotating. So let's add a transform node. Add a combine XYZ. Connect the scene time to the combine XYZ Z-axis. And now, before we check the animation, let's go to the first geometry node. For the line just now, let's deactivate this subdivide for now. Otherwise, the viewport will be really slow. Then play the animation to check the result. This is good for me. So let's activate the subdivide again, and we can now clone the location pin on the grid. So let's go back to the geometry node for grid. Select all these nodes. Press Ctrl G to group them. Press Tab to go out to parent node 3. Press F2 and name it location pin. Disconnect the location pin and put it beside. Connect the join geometry back to group output. Select 2 of this node. Press Ctrl Shift D to duplicate it. Rename it location pin. Connect it to join geometry. Delete the instance to point node. Connect the location pin to the instance. Then I want to randomize the scale and scale it smaller. Let's reduce the amount of instant object. Let's add material to the location pin and the grid as well. Add set material. Select grid. Select location pin. Let's turn off the wireframe and turn on the render preview. I want to change the location pin color to orange color. Turn the background to black color. Then let's add a camera. Press numpad 0 to see the camera view and move it to focus anywhere you want. You can follow my value as well. Let's increase the focal length to 120. And now I want to mask the material of the grid. I want this part to be darker and this part to be brighter. So to do this, let's select the grid. Select the grid shader. Go to shader editor. Press home button to see the node. Add a color ramp. Add a gradient texture. Add a mapping. Add a texture coordinate. Connect the object to vector. Let's turn this into 3D viewport. Press numpad 7 to see the top view. It's already top view. Add a plane axis. Rename it Grid Shader Control. I want to use this plane axis to control the masking. Go back to the texture coordinate for the grid. Select the controller. Then now, let's try to move this controller around to mask the material. Then I think I want to mask the line a little bit as well. So let's just copy the node from the grid shader. Go to the lines. Paste it here. Connect it to the strength. So for this one, let's add another controller to mask it. Name it Line Shader Control. Go back to the shader for the line. Select the controller. Again, move around the controller until we get the result we want. I think we can make the line slightly brighter. Let's increase it to 2 maybe. Then I think we can also add depth of field as well. So let's add a focus point for the camera. Name this camera focus point. Let's scale it smaller and put it somewhere near the center. So here is the area I want to focus. Select the camera, go to Camera Properties tab, activate depth of field, choose the focus point, reduce the aperture to 1 maybe. I think we can slightly adjust the smooth modifier for the line as well. Let's increase the repeat value to make it look nicer. Next, I want to add this base geometry to the scene as well. So to do this, let's turn off render preview for now. Unhide the base geometry. Let's increase this repeat value to 7 as well. Same like what we did for the line just now. Then for this one, let's try to move it a bit lower. Let's try minus 0.06 maybe. Just make sure it covers under the line. Turn off the wireframe, turn on render preview again. And now I want to add an aerial light. Let's move it higher. Scale it bigger. Increase the power to 40 maybe. Then put it somewhere here maybe. Then let's add some material for the base geometry as well. In shader editor, press home to see the node. Then I want to add a displacement. Connect it to displacement. Add a noise texture and connect it to height. Let's play around with this value to get the result you want. Change the base color to black. Then I want to increase the roughness as well. Put 0.7 maybe. Next, I want to add a pathway. So this is pretty simple. Let's add a Bezier curve. Go into edit mode. Press alternate G to see the X-ray mode. And drag the handle to adjust the spline shape. Make it fit with our landscape. Press E to extrude. Exit edit mode. Go to geometry node editor. Add a new geometry node. Add a curve to mesh node. Add a curve line. Connect it to profile curve. So here is the pathway we just add. Let's slightly adjust it to make it look nicer. I think we can add a set spline tab to make the line smoother. Then let's add a set material. We can use the material for location pin. We can also add a trim curve to animate the line. Let's go to the timeline. Go to around 40 frame. Drag the end value to 0. Hover and press I to add a keyframe. Go to around 120. Drag the end value to 1. Hover and press I again to add a keyframe. I think we can add more subdivide for the base geometry. I think without the displacement texture might be better. Let's try to change this to yellow maybe. By the way, feel free to try any color you like. Okay, now we done it. So if you like my video, please subscribe and see you in the next video. Bye.